Hey Hunters, Halazu here for another look into the Starfinder 2e playtest. This time looking at the Soldier. So this is one that I've kind of called mid, however, I will say ultimately this class is definitely going to change a bit after this playtest. Uh, However, I will put an asterisk with that where I don't well, some of it I do think is because of the way it's designed, where it's not really that great. It does have some kind of bad design elements. Starting with its main stat being con of all things, which is very baffling given it has a mechanic that suffers as a result of this for some reason. But ultimately, one of the biggest reasons that I suspect they're going to change is because the weapons they use are going to have to change. So, if you haven't seen the weapons video, I basically mentioned that area weapons are in a really bad state. Uh, and not necessarily in like oh, they're bad, they're not useful, which there is a bit of that where they could be a bit more practical to use, but there's also the fact that they're just downright stupid in how they work. Because in Paizo's infinite wisdom, in order to stop fighter and operative from being good with area weapons, even though those classes don't really function well with them anyway, because, well, they're two actions to fire, and you don't have any buffs to them. So instead of doing, just saying, oh yeah, it's not that bad, they decided, oh, we can't have it function off weapon proficiency. Let's make these use your class DC instead. Because that's a great idea. Completely forgetting that that actually breaks everything and makes the weapons incredibly stupid. Because now you could, theoretically, get any ranged weapon with the area trait and use it just fine. And first level, every class that isn't dexterity based is actually better with area weapons than other ranged weapons at first. So the Mystic, Witch Warper, Envoy, Solarian, all of them are actually more effective with an area weapon than they are with a conventional bullet projectile weapon. At least at first. Some, however, yeah, no, like the Mystic, of course, like you don't go past trained class DC, so you're not really great with them. Uh, the Witch Warper, meanwhile, is frighteningly good with them because they get up to master proficiency. They don't get legendary for some reason, but it's there. Where they're just good. They have master proficiency with all area weapons, basically. And what they actually are is irrelevant. So the scattergun, completely superfluous as a simple area fire weapon because it's just outclassed by the screamer, the advanced one, which is just the best cone weapon in the game. That said, the other advanced weapons are actually worse than their martial counterparts because, I mean, for some reason, the Magnetar rifle only has 6 shots in it, which means you can only area fire 3 targets. The Singing Coil is utterly useless because it has expend 10, meaning that the Zero Cannon is the best line weapon, with the asterisk that the Starfall pistol is at least a one-handed option. So it is good for Solarian. It is contextually useful, but yeah, it's interesting to say the least. And then with the burst weapons, I mean, the Stellar Cannon, it just has double the radius of the plasma cannon. It's like, yeah, the stellar cannon is a projectile weapon, so the plasma cannon does get more shots in the end, but it's reload 1, so who cares? Magstar rifles, utter trash for automatic, so you just use, ironically, one of 2 guns. Because at first level, you just use the machine gun. Because, while yes, it is reload for 2 actions, it does have the advantage of having 20 rounds at the start. Thus, you can hit 10 creatures with area fire. Whereas the roto laser is stuck with 10 by default. Thus, you can only hit 5 creatures with automatic fire, since automatic fire uses effectively 2 bullets per shot, just because they all have expend 1, so it's like, oh, well, they're all basically expend 2 per target. It's kind of weird. But the roto laser, because it's an energy weapon, you get better batteries, meaning that it just has way more shots by the end. So literally at second level, actually, it becomes better. Yeah, it's just weird. It's, it's just this bad state that is going to have to change, so Soldier is going to have to change as a result, but and it will give some suggestions for other things that can be updated, but ultimately they will have to be updated to coincide with how the weapons are updated. Though I have some ideas for what a good direction would be based on my idea of how to fix the AoE weapons. But they also have 10 plus con HP, which is probably a good thing that they didn't give them 12, because that would make them virtually unkillable. Only trained in perception. They get fortitude, which, not the one you wanted. You wanted reflex and will, because you're based on con. But you're only trained in reflex, interestingly enough. But ultimately, it's also actually even weirder in context, because it's, when you think about it, you're an expert in area weapons, which all currently use a reflex save. Yet you're actually vulnerable to them. I get it's kind of like, oh, well, we don't want it to be like Fighter, who's expert in fortitude and reflex, so they get expert in will instead of reflex. But ultimately, it's kind of just baffling, because, like, wait, you're actually susceptible to other area fire attacks? It's just okay. It's kind of one of those, wait a second, when you think about it, where it's just, so your weakest defense is the one your weapons use. So reflex is your worst, but you attack reflex all the time. Just kind of an odd thing of, yes, the one thing you're weak to. Area fire weapons. Where it's like, if you think about it, it's like, wait, what? It just comes off as kind of stupid, and wait, that doesn't make sense. However, then we get into their main abilities. We start with suppressing fire, which is, it's a neat idea, and I like the idea they're going for, but it does have some issues that I've seen some people mention. But basically, whenever you make an area fire or auto fire attack, You suppress the enemies who fail their save. Fail or critically fail. And the suppressed target takes -1 on attack rolls and -10 to speed. It's not amazing, especially the speed penalty, where, I mean, as people who've actually playtested it, because I have not gotten a chance yet, I want to, but I haven't gotten to yet, they have mentioned it does seem to feel a lot more static, so there's not a lot of movement, so the speed penalty doesn't feel necessary. And as an aside, yeah, I have not playtested this, but oh well. It is what it is. But and of course, I'm also not really a Pathfinder player, haven't really played it before. But I want to play Starfinder because it's a cool sci-fi RPG that is somewhat D&D adjacent, and I am a D&D player first. So I'm looking at this from the perspective of someone who just wants to play Starfinder. I don't care about the Pathfinder crossover stuff as much. I care about Starfinder as an independent system. So it, it's what it is, but that's the lens I'm looking at it through. But anyway, with suppressed, ultimately an issue that you have is that the penalty to attack rolls is to attacking anyone. So you're actually very good in armor. So you get up to heavy armor, and you will get up to legendary armor even. But that ultimately makes it where enemies don't actually want to attack you. And ultimately, I feel like, and then it's like you're also giving out more attack penalties. So you're never going to be hit. So it's like, why would we attack him? Like, let's just, like, unless you're using area fire weapons, in which case, well, that's irrelevant. It's also you're only trained in, and probably not going to be your best. So, yeah, it gets kind of silly with how that functions, but basically it makes it where you're actually really bad at getting enemies to attack you specifically. The best ways you have is just not getting in cover while your allies all get in cover. Unless, of course, you have a Solarian where things get complicated, to say the least. As due to the way you function, you're probably going to be hitting them a lot. And it's going to be a very difficult game of positioning where you're trying to get it where the Solarian is out of your areas of effect, and try to keep them out of it. There are 2 builds that kind of get around it, or 3 builds actually that kind of get around it, but other than that, it's gonna be an interesting time trying to get around it. Then we have primary target. I don't know what the hell they were thinking with this. Okay, so the whole idea is that when you do an area fire attack, you can shoot again using the weapon's expend value, which means that you're using even more ammo. Ignore the unwieldy trait, and then you make a ranged strike against a single target in the attack. Sure, this is a free action, but it's just okay. Yeah, it's just weird. It's because ultimately it's like, okay, so you use con for the saving DC, but you have to use dex for the attack roll of this. Which means, and like, ultimately what this does is it doesn't do more damage. It uses... all it does is suppress the target. So... and it's like... and it's also automatically adjacent to the center point or closest to you in the attack. So it's just... it's not even like you're guaranteed to get someone else. It's like, so who the primary target is predetermined, even though you haven't done the saving throws yet, which means that there's a chance that, oh, that's the one guy who failed the save and got suppressed. So primary target does nothing. And then there's even one of the fighting styles that actually makes this completely irrelevant. It's just... this is useless, effectively. Because it's not like, oh, well, if you miss a creature, then you can choose them as the primary target and get a second chance to suppress them. No, that's not what it does. It's just bad. It's useless. Especially since you're more likely to make them fail the saving throw than hit them with this. Well, with an asterisk on it, in that up until the very end, this actually progresses faster than your save DC for area attacks. Yeah, soldier is a weird class, and I will also say, like, I get their idea if they want to move away from its fighter in space, but they haven't really found a good design for it to not be, besides the 1E version where it's like, yeah, it's fighter in space, but it has some cool ideas. But then we get to fighting styles. So you get to choose one of 5 fighting styles right now. So Action Hero and Erudite Warrior were added to the field test ones of Armor Storm, Bombard, and Close Quarters. And these are kind of... yeah, it's they're kind of one note at times. Like, especially, like, Action Hero, Bombard, and Close Quarters. Armor Storm and Erudite Warrior, at least, feel like they go slightly different directions with it and have a bit more variety, but Action Hero, you use automatic weapons. And their benefit... like, their first benefit is kind of dumb, where it's like when you successfully make a ranged strike with a weapon with the automatic trait, something you're actually not really that good at because they decided, hey, we want to give con as your main stat. Because let's have all 6 attributes have a class dedicated to it. Because that's great design, you know? We don't want it to be fighter in space and use strength or dex, you know? That would be awful. Instead, it just makes a class that's... like, every time Make a Ranged Strike appears, it's just... why? You're not good at that. Like, I get the idea that, oh, yeah, you're good at... you still suppress when you use the automatic traits other mode, but... that's not that great. But the other benefit is actually good, but... where the size of auto fire is now the full range increment instead of half, as that's how automatic weapons work, where you use half the range increment for the cone you auto fire in. So basically, if you have a 30-foot range, it's a 15-foot cone. 40-foot would be 20 feet, etc., etc. So this does double the range of your auto fire cone, which is awesome. And when you use auto fire, you can designate anyone inside to be your primary target. Basically getting around probably the less annoying issue of primary target without addressing the fact that it's still the dumbest thing in the game. Like, at the very least, you can target the enemy most likely to succeed the save, which is probably the best use for that, assuming you still have ammo left over for it, but yeah, it's just kind of it's using primary target, which frankly sucks. Then we have Armor Storm. So this one is kind of the pure defensive. So you have resistance equal to half your level, with a minimum of 1 from suppressed enemies. So basically, if a suppressed enemy still hits you somehow, which, I mean, honestly, it's kind of funny that it's like, yeah, this looks good, but then you have to remember that you're really hard to hit for suppressed enemies. Like, because they end up having a -3 to attack against you rather than the -1 most other allies are going to be at, as your AC is so much higher towards the end. So it's like, oh, that ends up being a bit less useful because they do go up to legendary armor. But you also can disarm, grapple, reposition, shove, or trip, even if you don't have a free hand, which is, yeah, that's kind of odd. Also, another benefit I forgot is you never count as being in the area of a ranged weapon you made an attack with. This has very, very limited use, as this only works if you're using the Stellar Cannon. Theoretically, the Plasma Cannon, but the Stellar Cannon is the one you're going to be using right now, no matter what, because its area is just bigger. Because it does hit 4 times the area, just about. I think it might technically be 3 times, but I don't care. Because you're attacking in a 4x4 grid, roughly, rather than a 2x2, is what it is on a, like, grid map. So, yeah, it actually hits a lot more. So even with, like, technically the Plasma Cannon is better die, it's still better to use the Stellar Cannon, because bigger AoE is just more useful. So the disarms and all this stuff, shove is actually a bit less useful for a reason that'll be apparent later, but you gain +1 to disarm, grapple, reposition, shove, and trip suppressed foes, so, okay. And when you successfully do it, they become suppressed. Unfortunately, this whole thing, it runs into an issue that I have to be blunt about it. You're a class dedicated to using 2 actions to fire your gun. You don't really have the actions to fully support this. And this is a theme that will come up again and again in this class, but there is just so little leeway that you get with these area and auto fire attacks, because you have to use 2 actions every time for them. So stuff like this, where it's like, oh, you've got alternate actions you can take, it's all competing for that 3rd action, because area weapons can't be 1 action, I guess. Even though unwieldy exists. Kind of underutilized. Don't get me wrong, there's utilization for it, it's just, there's not much. Then there's Bombard. So, basically, when you attack with an area weapon, you can select a number of allies in the area equal to half your con mod, and those allies are unaffected by the attack. So, by default, you'll be able to pick 2 allies, though that will usually be more than enough, because more than likely you're only going to have one melee ally anyway, if any. So that is going to be more than enough for the most part. Also, probably the most powerful benefit by far, enemies who succeed the save, but not critically succeed, an area attack saving throw are still suppressed. Yeah, you just almost always suppress people, which is definitely nice, especially because enemies tend to have high reflex saves, apparently. That is something I've seen mentioned. Not sure how this will end up in Starfinder 2e, but we'll see. And then we have close quarters. So when you successfully make a strike with a two-handed melee weapon, you suppress the target. So, yeah, kind of similar to Action Hero, but for melee weapons. And once again, we run into an issue of you're still based on con, not dex or strength. So you're not really that accurate with them. Then you also have Punitive Strike, which is just reactive strike, but it ignores the unwieldy trait of your weapon. And it also suppresses the target on hit, even though I think technically this would still trigger on it. Yeah. Also, there's no duration on the suppressed. It's like, is it till the start of their next turn? Or is it the start of your next turn, maybe? I don't know. Still, it's a useful reaction to have. And it is definitely a good thing to have, where it's, it makes sense as a, oh, hey, this is a ranged meta. Okay, here's something to give out as a penalty for making ranged strikes around you as a melee soldier. Sadly, this is the only actual melee weapon soldier. You have to go down this build to really be good at it. So I think technically there's some other, you could still do stuff on the others, but through one feat. But ultimately, there is a Starfinder 2e-ism where it's like, oh, well, you're really just good at one thing, like, oh, well, we can't have anyone but Solarian be good with melee weapons, even though they don't actually use melee weapons, meaning that a lot of them are kind of superfluous. But last but not least, we get Erudite Warrior. So these guys, you get training in Diplomacy or Society, and a lore skill of your choice, so you get to use that kind of crappy system. Then when you gain Armor, Expertise, Mastery, and Legendary proficiencies, you also get that for Diplomacy or Society. Not the lore skill, but well, who cares about lore anyway? At least I just can't like it. It's such a stupid system, in my opinion. It's like, I don't want a million different types of lore. Just have history and call it a day. But, oh well. You also get the Oppressive Presence action. Because, oh boy, we don't have enough stuff to do with that third action, do we? Oh boy. But you can target an enemy in 60 feet and they become suppressed. And if it attacks you with a strike or other offensive action, it loses that condition. This is actually a neat one, because it actually encourages the enemy to attack you, where it's like, oh, hey, you're suppressed unless you attack me. And thinking about it, maybe this should be applied to suppressing fire, where if they target you, then they lose the suppressed condition from it. Because this is definitely a useful idea of, hey, you want to attack me because otherwise you'll suffer this penalty. And it's definitely nice. It plays out like a taunt. Unfortunately, being an action does kind of kill it because, yeah, you really do not have anything close to good action economy. Then we have Walking Armory, where basically, because you're a con class, not strength, you get to use con for the strength required for your armor, but if you already meet the strength requirement, then reduce its bulk by 1, so you can carry a bit more. And you add half your constitution modifier to the bulk you can carry before being encumbered, and the max bulk by full con, so you can carry more. This, and actually I'll talk about it now, Fearsome Bulwark, you can use con for intimidation and athletic checks to reposition and shove. Yeah, this all kind of feels like tacked on stuff for, oh, hey, you're a con class now. Okay, here's some stuff to buff you. Also, this part of Fearsome Bulwark only really matters if you went Armor Storm, because you're oftentimes using two-handed weapons. Like, yeah, there is one-handed option, but you're not going to have a hand free most of the time. And the con for intimidation feels like it's pretty much going to be relegated mostly to out of combat. As in combat, well, you've got 2 actions to shoot your gun. That really restricts your action economy to a unfortunately poor level. Then we go down and we see that Soldier Weapon Expert is at 5th level, and you gain access to the critical specialization for area and automatic weapons, but then you don't get class DC to Expert till 7th level, meaning you have to wait 2 more levels. That's definitely a choice, because I thought they were supposed to be good with area of effect weapons, and I thought that was supposed to be their whole big thing, and, you know, they use the class DC, so why the hell do you get class DC after expert weapon proficiency? That's just kind of baffling and weird. So then weapon specialization's also at 7th, so at least you get that with 7th. And that's the one time your weapon proficiency actually matters. So this does mean that the Screamer does get a bit of a downgrade compared to the Flamethrower. But I think its base damage is actually good enough to where this doesn't matter as much as it could. However, you do at least get Soldier Master at 15th, which is the same, which is for both weapons and class DC. Thankfully. And then, of course, you get Legendary Armor at 17th, and then Legendary Class DC at 19th. But you don't get Legendary in the weapons themselves. Because, yeah, area weapons are jank as hell, to say the least. Yeah, and then we have the feats. So, Burst of Strength. You fail or critically fail an athletics check to disarm, grapple, reposition, shove, or trip. Stuff you're normally not that great at. Yeah. But it's at least a reaction, so you're able to do this off turn. it doesn't really take up your actions, but the ability it triggers off of are an action. So yeah, basically you re-roll the check, but use the new result. So it's nice. It's just, so you mean I have to use something that I'm not actually that good at, especially at first, where it's like, I mean, yeah, reposition and shove eventually starts to use your con, but at first you're not really good at it. You're not even guaranteed to even be able to do it, since 90% of the time you're using a two-handed weapon, and thus can't use these. And it's just, it's ultimately just baffling that this exists. It's not bad, it's just, I mean, it's just not good in the context of Soldier, where you're using so many two-action things that it's like, you don't really have the actions to spend on this. So, yeah. Then we have Pin Down, which is an action you take after an area fire or auto fire attack. So, and then it says, and you are wielding an area automatic weapon. But you'll almost never not be using them. Or actually, it's like, so wait, you mean I also have to have the weapon that I literally just used for that area fire auto fire attack? It's like, I don't really think there's any situation where you would actually not, like, do an area fire auto fire and then unintentionally have your weapon dropped. Because that's the only time you would not have that condition met as well. I mean, it's like, I kind of get it, but at the same time, it's kind of ridiculous where it's like, oh, you mean the thing you have to have for this first requirement? However, basically you choose a creature in the area of the attack, and they must attempt to save again, and they're suppressed on a failure. So, yeah. Basically, I mean, all this is literally re-roll the check to suppress the target. So, and once again, it's like we have an action. So now I have to take my full turn to suppressing fire, or to area fire. Then I use my last action to pin down, just to give one enemy effectively disadvantage on the save. Or it's like, force the enemy to re-roll their saving throw against the suppress only. It's just, it's not really that good at all. Then we have Quick Swap. So this is a reaction while wielding a two-handed weapon. An enemy moves adjacent to you. And it just lets you switch weapons. You have to go from one two-handed weapon to another. And you will notice that they also have this obsession with only using two-handed weapons, which is slightly annoying. But this one, at least, I will say it kind of makes sense. Especially if you're not Armor Storm, and it's like, oh, well, you know, I want to switch from my, you know, like, let's say I'm using a Stellar Cannon. I want to go from the Stellar Cannon over to my Screamer, or my Dashko, or basically a Battle Axe of sorts, I guess. You know, swap between those. So this does have a lot of context that I think is pretty cool. And I do like the weapon swap idea. And I think I'm actually tempted to say I might want this baseline. Just let me casually swap weapons freely. Then there is Ready Reload. Now, this is one action, but I will say this one kind of makes sense for all the wrong reasons. So, essentially, this one action is a 2-action reload. So basically, you reload the weapon as just one action rather than 2. That's it. And this is kind of a band-aid for the fact that some, as in, I literally think any that aren't the one you actually want to use of the type, do have 2-action reloads. So this is nice for those if you are using one of those weapons, but I think with the soldier meta as it is right now, it doesn't actually matter. Because ultimately, yeah, the 3 AoE weapons you would actually want to use are all reload 1. The only reload 2 AoE weapons are the Magnetar rifle, which you won't be using it ever. It's just awful beyond belief. The machine gun, which is literally the next level, going to be pretty much irrelevant. I mean, technically it does have a slightly longer range increment, but that's not really a big deal when the roto laser just has more shots and less reload. And then the flamethrower, which is just destroyed by the screamer in power level. So, yeah, also the auto-target rifle, which is just a downgrade to the machine gun. And that is eventually outclassed by the roto laser. But ultimately, it's just a thing of, this would be useful if the 2-action reload weapons were good. As it is right now, it's kind of a dead feat, where maybe this could have been baseline as well, just as a, yeah, this is not very convenient, especially when all of these weapons use 2 actions, yet they also have plenty of the 2-action reload guns. Yeah, it's just baffling that, like, this is necessary, but so ultimately I think this might actually want to be baseline as a, hey, you know, you're a soldier, you're an expert at reloading these. Go. Like, go on with your day. Pick something else. Where this one kind of reads off as, well, it's kind of a dead choice, or it's a mandatory choice. Like, and ultimately, I think that is another thing to say, that this feels like, right now, it's basically dead because the 2-action reloads aren't good. Whereas, with the, like, there's a possibility that they might buff the AoE weapons that have 2 actions to reload to be way more powerful, in which case, well, suddenly ready reload becomes mandatory. So this should probably go baseline, simply to avoid the fact that this is either a feat tax or a dead feat. It's probably better off as a feature for, hey, if you need it, you have it. You may not necessarily need it, but you have it, at least. Then there's Warning Spray, which triggers off of initiative, so basically you make a free area fire auto fire. But you can't use a grenade or missile. But creatures in the area take no damage, but still make a save to avoid being suppressed. Or take other effects that the area attack would normally impose. So Bombard is going to go nuts with this, as you can pretty much automatically suppress your enemies. Then there's Whirling Swipe, which feels like something that is, like, it's kind of in a weird limbo, because it is 2 actions itself, technically, which is kind of annoying because of other stuff that we'll get into. But basically, you use a weapon, a melee weapon, as if it was an area burst weapon with a 5-foot burst. And if it's a reach weapon, it becomes the reach of your weapon. So basically, if you have, which basically it's a burst 10 feet, and you do not count as being in the burst, but it is center of the kernel of your square. Though actually, this does imply that it's a 4x4 away from you. Or not 4x4, 2x2 away from you, but I think it's like it's intended to be you're in the burst. So it's you and then 3 squares adjacent to you, but the way it's worded actually means it's kind of a close blast 2 from 4E, where it's like a 2x2 area in front of you, which is actually kind of crazy, especially when you consider how that ends up playing with a reach weapon. But I think this should probably be changed to reword it to be just it's everyone around you in your reach is it. So it's not exactly a burst weapon, or maybe change burst to be centered on a 5x5 area instead. Just as a, hey, yeah, you target this 5x5 burst, 5-foot by 5-foot burst, and then that square and everything around it within the radius is what gets hit, which would definitely help the burst 5 feet stuff. But as this is, it's like, it's kind of weird trying to wrap your head around how this exactly works. But basically, creatures that fail to save take the damage from the melee strike. It works as an area attack would, but you do add your strength mod to the damage. It's just you use a basic reflex save. Then if you're using a weapon with a backswing or sweep trait, you get +1 to the save DC, as those both affect on like multiple targets and stuff. So it is nice that they did that as a, hey, these are supposed to be used for that sort of thing. So like backswing is for like a missed attack, you get a bonus. Though it's actually kind of baffling that this actually uses that. But then with sweep though, like that actually makes sense, where it's like, oh yeah, you're already kind of supposed to do something like that in theory, if sweep was actually kind of worth going for, when it's really not. But then we move on to second level. So menacing laughter, one of those many actions we really needed because we don't know anything we could do with our one action we get besides area fire. But this one's actually at least pretty powerful for an action, as you get to demoralize each creature in 30 feet that is suppressed. So yeah, it's an AoE demoralize. No joke. So it actually isn't too bad, except for being the same level as a certain feat we'll talk about. Then there's Relentless Endurance, which is actually pretty neat. Basically, once per hour when you take damage, you get D8 plus 4 HP. And this does have a level +4 benefit that just increases it by that amount. So basically, you get a buffer of HP. So you get a THP buffer, and yeah, that's also really good if it wasn't for the other feat here. Then we'll talk about You'll Have to Go Through Me. This is very cool and thematic, but basically you Now, this is another type of feat that they have where it's 2 actions, but you make an area fire auto fire. So basically, it's a while you area fire and auto fire, you could do this instead. But till the start of your next turn, if you'd be forced to move via forced movement, you move 10 feet less. So you stick in place better. And until start of next turn, you get the living shield reaction. But using a move action ends it. Anyway, living shield. An enemy damages your ally who is benefiting from cover provided by you. So it's a very weird one where this only works if your ally is using you as cover, which also unceremoniously nerfs Skittermander and Yosoki soldiers more than they probably should be. Where it's like, so you can't really use cover from them. Also, it really encourages another ally to be one of those races to benefit from this, but or plays the Barathu, like the merged Barathu, who gets to start as large, because that's a lot of cover that you give. But and then you reduce the damage by your level plus con, and you take an amount of damage equal to what's negated. Yeah, this is definitely cool. It's just having to be like using yourself as cover, it just makes this so niche. And it's also the same level as Shot on the Run, which pretty much kills it. So what does Shot on the Run do? Basically, you stride your speed and make an area fire auto fire attack. Yeah, just casually saving you on actions, particularly one you'll probably need to do semi-regularly, as especially if you're going with cone or line weapons. Bombard with Stellar Cannon, you'll probably need this less, but the others will absolutely want this as they try to position themselves best. And it just feels like, oh yeah, you know, on an action-starved class, being able to condense your stride action with the area fire, effectively making area fire and auto fire take one action, is just incredibly powerful. And this one just feels like, yeah, this is just, why would you not take this? I'd even say maybe this should be baseline as well. And perhaps this should be the 3rd level feature instead of the con for skills. Because that, it's like, ultimately, it's like, oh yeah, you're going all in on the con. And I honestly don't think they should be con-based. It's kind of just, oh yeah, you're tank the class. Even though you kind of suck at actually being a tank and getting people to hit you. But that's neither here nor there. But I'd also say that's kind of a Pathfinderism, where it's like, oh yeah, you know, you might have way more proficiency in armor that makes it very hard to hit you compared to anyone else. So it's like, why would I hit you? You're like 4 AC above everyone else. It's like I have a -4 to hit you compared to anyone else. It's like, why would I not go after them? But it's just, I'm sure they had an idea. It's just, there is that contradiction of, yeah, maybe having different proficiency levels for armor is not the best idea, because it creates some wild differences in armor. Because soldiers will casually have 5 more AC than several other classes. But regardless, Shot on the Run, this one feels like it's kind of just an auto-include right now because it's so useful to be able to just stride up your speed, then area fire. Like, especially for automatic and cone weapons. Line, they tend to have decent enough range, and burst, they're, like, they need it the least, but even then it's like, you know, you're action starved. This is really good for that. Like, the only one who won't want it is the melee. soldier, but even then, this should theoretically work with Whirling Swipe. But, I mean, because yeah, like, only the melee soldier really can take Relentless Endurance. Also maybe Menacing Laughter, but probably Relentless Endurance instead, because it's just better for them. It's just one of those wacky things where, yeah, this class is just... It is in a poor place right now. I'd say, actually, yeah, this one's kind of on par with the Envoy for worst mechanical design. Of, yes, let's stack this class that has, like, is basically built around a 2-action thing. Yeah, let's just casually give them a million different single actions to use. It's like, why? That's on top of all the other single actions you would need, like step, stride, reload, all this stuff. Yeah, that's a great idea. Let's give you a bunch of single actions on a class that's terrible at using them. Then 4th level, we got Collateral Witness, which is a reaction when you reduce your primary target to 0 HP using auto fire. This at least gives some sort of use to primary target, where it's like, oh, hey, if you kill this guy, well, you get to reaction demoralize a creature in the area of the auto fire. It's also only for auto fire. And you have a +2 bonus to it. And if you're Legendary Intimidation or Action Hero, and the enemy is closest to you, I think that might have to be if you're Action Hero, but, or actually, and the targeted Collateral Witness is the enemy close to you. You can use this as a free action with the same trigger. Yeah, so casually, Action Hero gets this way, way earlier than anyone else does. But this does feel like ultimately Action Hero is going to be the main beneficiary of this, just because they have the most stuff for auto fire specifically. So you'll probably want to use this. It's not bad. It's just, it's there. It's a cool idea where you get to demoralize someone after you kill someone, but it is kind of annoying that it's tied into such a terrible feature, where it's like, oh, hey, here's an actually cool effect that is based around an otherwise terrible feature. Overwhelming Assault. Multi-attack penalty against suppressed targets is -4 and -8. So, wait a second. Why the heck is a soldier handling multi-attack penalties? Like, it's only relevant if you're using the single shot on an auto-fire weapon. Because another issue with AoE weapons is that they ignore the multi-attack penalty. Because logic. Yeah, it's like, oh, well, the way they work is very stupid, because, like, oh, well, this feat is basically dead, because why would you ever be making normal strikes? Like, because only one build can actually, like, I mean, granted, the melee build can use it, but they're the only people who can. Otherwise, like, Action Hero, I guess, could in theory, but even then, all this really does is make up for the fact that you have low strength. So, in practice, it just makes you on par with the Solarian in accuracy. At best. It's like, oh. Yeah, it's definitely a bit baffling to see, is just like, yes, the class that completely ignores multi-attack penalty normally suddenly has something that makes them less concerned with the multi-attack penalty, because logic. Then we have Punishing Salvo. which is an action after you use an area fire. So this doesn't work with auto fire. But you make a follow-up range strike against your primary target, ignoring the unwieldy trait. And it counts as a strike made using primary target. Which basically, this is kind of weird because ultimately it's like a primary target strike, so I guess it doesn't do damage. But it also doesn't say if it expends or not. It's like, what exactly is this doing? Also, yeah, once again, single action, because we needed more of those. Now we have shoving shot. So, in theory, this is cool, but it's ruined by one really stupid thing. So the idea is, you make an area fire attack, area fire or auto fire, and shove somebody. They have to be in the first range increment, but it's probably where you're shooting anyway, because I don't think any of these really go beyond that. However, so there's also a bunch of other stuff. So basically, if it's area burst, the shove is pushes away from the center. But if the shove failed, the save DC for the area attack is reduced by 1 or 2 on a crit fail. So basically, if you fail to shove the guy, well, you get a penalty to the save DC, which is kind of annoying, but at least it's cool you get a shove with this. So you'd shove people off cliffs. Now, the problem. You shove first. Yeah, this is probably another thing that I'll probably reword. I will allow my players to reverse. Just as a house rule of, yeah, no, this feat is actually stupid, because what this means is you will shove them, which means you can shove them out of the AoE. And then you do the AoE. So it's so stupid because, like, okay, so by using this, you are actually crippling your... So ultimately, as it's written, this is just a stupid feat that only has the use of shove people off cliffs or into hazards, which makes it significantly more niche than it should be, because otherwise it's like, it's a cool idea of like, oh yeah, you shove people around, but wait a second, you shove then resolve the AoE attack, which means there's a decent chance, oh yeah, that guy who was in the burst, oh, now they're out of it. And heaven forbid you're trying to use the plasma cannon with its pathetic 5-foot burst and push somebody, and you're guaranteed to push somebody out of the burst. It's just kind of, when you think about it, it doesn't make sense at all. It's cool, but this definitely feels like it needs a quick rework to actually function as I think it's intended, where you do the area fire, then shove the guy. But, and then also maybe, like, if the target succeeded on their save, then they get a bonus to the... So it's like, it's harder to be shoved then, would be a good thing. Just so it's like, it's not a worse area fire attack. It's a, oh hey, you have a... Like, you do your area fire and then make a shove attempt as part of it, which would be much cooler. It's just, it's kind of ruined by that. The order of operations doesn't work. Then we have Stock Striker, which is kind of a niche thing, and pretty much the antithesis to Quick Swap. But this one, you can just whack people with your weapon. But you get the parry trait with it, which is actually a neat addition to it where it's like, oh yeah, you're able to parry with it now. Haha! Granted, this does unfortunately come with an action to use it like that, which is just stupid. It also increases your AC, which is actually detrimental to your job as a tank, because, yeah, it's like, oh, you're not just about absorbing damage, you have to get attacked first, but this makes it much, like, less reasonable to attack you. It's kind of baffling at times. But basically, you also can use the two-handed ranged weapons as a D6 bludgeoning, brawling melee weapon with the analog trait. And it, of course, gets extra damage dice and tracking benefits from upgrades, but it does not get other upgrades installed as you're not using the normal function. But even just having a quick melee attack you can make no matter what is a nice addition. Just forget the fact that quick swap is a thing that exists, which is arguably just more useful than this, but oh well. Then we have widen area, which is basically just meta magic, but for soldier. And, like, I get that meta magic can still be useful. It's just kind of, oh, it's meta magic. Great. On a class that's action starved. Oh boy. But basically you add 5 feet to a burst. It normally has a radius of at least 10 feet. So, yeah, I guess screw you, plasma cannon? Unnecessarily? It's like, so wait, why doesn't the plasma cannon get affected? And then a cone or line that is normally 15 feet gets an extra 5 feet to it, or 10 feet if it is longer than that. So, yeah, I don't know why the hell they hate the plasma cannon so much, but I guess they can't let that D12 damage, in a 5-foot radius, get any buffs. It's like, why? Why, Paizo? Then at 6th level, we have Covering Fire for 1 or 2 actions, which is interesting. So it doesn't actually have any requirements. So you can actually use this to make ranged strikes against targets in your deal. So effectively, you can make a ranged strike, even if it's an area weapon, not automatic. And if you hit, you deal no damage, but the targeted foe becomes suppressed and takes -2 on attacks against your ally that you've selected. So basically, you select an ally. This is definitely a bit more useful. It does help you protect a very squishy ally, like your poor Witch Warper, trying to extend their quantum field, because that is definitely a quirk that I'll talk about when we get to Witch Warper. It is kind of weird to see this, but oh well, it's there at least. And, it's nice that it's got the 1 action deal. But then the 2 action deal, which you'll probably do most of the time, make an area fire and select an ally in the first range increment of the weapon, whether or not they're in the AoE. But any foes suppressed by the area fire take -2 circumstance penalty on attacks made against the selected ally. So yeah, Bombard immediately wants to grab this because that is just awesome. And it is nice that this exists. It would be nice, however, if they just added a default thing where enemies you suppress also have an additional -1 to everyone but you. Would be maybe a nice bonus of, oh hey, you have a greater penalty against anyone who's not me. But oh well, this is nice at least. It does feel like an auto pick for Bombard, but oh well. Then there's Fog of War, which is kind of odd. So basically, you make an area fire or auto fire attack, and the area becomes a concealing zone. So you conceal everyone inside, but they're also like they can't see. You can't really see in or out. It's a cool thematic thing, but practically, I don't know if it's really going to be that useful because it's symmetrical. It's not like... So, probably the best uses I can think of for it is if, like, you've got a sort of vanguard that you're dealing with, and then there's, like, this boss guy. Like, let's say the vanguard is up over and I'll be back. You've got this leader guy over by creatures in Fog of War. And then you could fire on the... you could use Fog of War on the vanguard while your operative guy is going for the leader. And then maybe you have a witch warper who can drop an AoE on into the Fog of War to kind of ignore the concealed condition. However, ultimately, it's like, this is just one of those... I feel like it's a bit too niche because of how it's symmetrical. But also, weirdly enough, how it actually functions is... Like, how it's actually worded is... It basically makes it where enemies in the zone have concealment to people outside the zone, but creatures where it's like kind of it's only around the edge of the burst is the concealment. So it's like, oh, well, you're concealed to anyone outside the burst, but they're concealed to anyone in the burst. Rather than just, oh, creatures trying to look through the zone also have to deal with concealment, which would make more sense, but oh well, it's what it is. It's a weird one. I feel like this could maybe be cut because it's a bit too niche, but at least it's not a one-action thing like you. I'll be back, though. Once per day, if you were unconscious and regain consciousness, as a free action, you can immediately stand and draw a weapon. I mean, looking at this, I feel like this is the wrong point. It's kind of weird to use that quote here, as I'll be back implies you go and are going to come back later, not, oh, I've come back. This one is kind of baffling because, like, you've used this quote on something that doesn't make sense for the quote. I don't get why it's called that. This probably needs a new name, Paizo. I mean, it's not the most laughable name. I mean, that is far and away Get Them. Mostly because of the context that Get 'em is a contraction of Get Them, so yeah, they really didn't think that one through. But then we have Intimidating Taunt. Another extra action, because we needed those. With it is being yoinked. Anyway, so yeah, here's another action to use, and you basically attempt an intimidation check, compare it to the will DC of an enemy in 60 feet, so basically target somebody and taunt them. Then afterwards, they're immune to it for an hour, and it has either the audio or visual trait, depending on how you taunt them. So you could just, like, give them a middle finger for a visual trait, or you could just say mean words, like insult their mother or something, for audio. But on a crit success, any hostile actions that the creature take must include you as a target or area, as long as you're visible to the target. Otherwise, it takes a -2 penalty to the attack or save DC. Then on a success, it's just the next one. Failure or crit fail, it's unaffected. You failed. Then we have offensive defense, which requires you to have the force field upgrade in your armor, or be holding a shield with a tech trait. But basically, you take 2 actions and do the area fire action, using the force field or shield instead of a weapon. It deals 2d10 bludgeoning damage and is in the shield group. It affects creatures in 5 feet of you and has the tracking +1 trait. And a creature who fails or critically fails its reflex save is knocked back 5 feet. So, yeah, it's an option, interestingly. It's kind of weird that it shows up this late, and it's just kind of a weird one. But, I mean, it's a hit everyone around you, which is not half bad. You do push him away, though. But, I mean, this is probably good for Armor Storm, who kind of wants to be point blank with enemies. So it's like, bam! Also, this is good for knocking people off cliffs. But, well, it's like, it's there. Then it has, so if you have a superior force field or shield, it has tracking +2. If elite, it does 3d10 damage. If it's ultimate, tracking +3. And then Paragon is 4d10 damage. So basically it progresses as a weapon. It's kind of jank and weird, but it's a neat concept, at least. I'll give it that. 8th level, we have Ammunition Conservation. I mean, you're pretty much just going to default to this on Action Hero, but basically, auto fire expends only 1 use per target. So now that Rotolaser's targeting even more enemies to an absurd degree. And I believe by this point you might... Yeah, you do have access to advanced batteries by this point. So, yeah, have fun being able to target up to 40 enemies. Though you can't really get that many, but point remains that, yeah. I mean, you could do 220 enemy shots in a row. So that is definitely a big buff. And definitely one of the nice feats of just... It just works, you know? It's like, oh yeah, boom. Bring it on. 1 action. Yay. While you're wielding a 2-handed weapon, but until the start of your next turn, -2 AC and gain resistance equal to half your level to all damage. But if you're Armor Storm, the resistance is up to your level from suppressed enemies, because they already have that half level from it. So you just get your full level bonus now. This is definitely an annoying one. Yeah, it's kind of weird, because it's basically a hit me, which is nice to have, but it's annoying that it's 1 action. So I have to use my action to do this when I've got, you know, where I can only do a area fire action and this. So I can't do any other 1 action things. But at the very least, I mean, you could probably position yourself well with shot on the run, because it's safe to assume you have that. Like, it's a neat idea. It's just, once again, it's an action in a world of, well, you're using 2 actions regularly, so yay. Then you have concentrated shots. 2 actions, and, you know, you have to be using an area or automatic weapon, but you make a range strike without using the area trait. And you get +4 to the damage roll, +6 at 11th, +8 at 15th. And if you use an automatic weapon, you consume ammo as if you used auto fire against 3 enemies. So essentially the equivalent of a full magnetar rifle clip, at least. But it's there. This is definitely an interesting idea where you're just like, oh yeah, it's a single target shot. The only issue is this is way less accurate because it's going to end up at best, -3 compared to your normal area fire. Once again, the wackiness of how these work and just how weird it is. Though, and also it's like, this was just after you got it where they fixed your accuracy with area fire weapons. So it's not like, oh, well, actually, it's more equivalent because this is between when you get weapon specialization or weapon expert and class DC expert. If it was 6th level, it would be in between that, and it's like, oh, well, that's actually more accurate, but or is it a better proficiency, but oh well, it's a good idea. It is nice to be able to say, oh yeah, I'm using a stellar cannon. Okay, I'm just going to shoot this guy specifically with it. Which is nice, but it does have a bit of, well, I mean, it's a bit late in the tree where it's like, it would be nice if you could just get that way earlier. Secondly, it would be nice if con wasn't their main stat. But as it is, it's just, eh. Then you have deflect missile, which as a reaction, if a bomb or missile is thrown/launched through your firearm's range, if you're using an area or automatic weapon, you can basically make an attack roll. You know, that thing you're so good at as a soldier with your con main stat, against the reflex DC of the missile grenade. On a success, you deflect it, and basically just make it where it fails. So, for one, this assumes you're regularly fighting enemies who shoot bombs and missiles. Like, you're getting regular bombs and missiles thrown at you. And then you want to shoot it out of the air and, like, have the decent enough dexterity to hit it. Yeah, it's just baffling that this exists at all. It's like, it would be cool. It's like, it's cool in theory, but in practice, it's so niche and underpowered that it's just dead in the water. It's like, you just want to take concentrated shot or bring it on or ammunition conservation. It's, everything else is better. Then there's Run Hot, which is 3 actions. But this at least is actually pretty cool in what it does, where, yeah, no, you just casually area fire twice. The second area fire does have +2 to the save, -2 to the save DC, essentially. It's actually a +2 to their saves, but it's basically the save DC's -2. And your weapon's unusable for 1 round as it cools off, but, I mean, on a Kasatha, just swap to your other gun. I could only imagine the shenanigans of a Kasatha just casually being like, oh yeah, I'm just gonna casually, okay, here's Stellar Cannon 1 at you boys, here's 2 shots from it. Oh, my next turn, oh, my other Stellar Cannon's still cooling down. Here, let me just swap hands, my active hands, and, hello, second Stellar Cannon, and just blast people away with it. For others, though, this definitely isn't going to be as useful, but it's definitely a fun one of, oh, the shenanigans you can pull with this. And also that Hail Mary of, okay, I'm just gonna blast you to smithereens now. And it does unlock another really cool feat later. So this one's definitely cool. The 1 round cooldown is kind of unfortunate, but I mean, it's fine. I mean, and you can also just drop your gun and then swap to another. But Kasathas will be... Like, anyone with extra arms is just going to be laughing maniacally with this. It definitely does reward some races more than others, unfortunately. But honestly, it's like, it's okay. Anchoring impacts. You have to have suppressing fire, but that's your basic thing. Basically, when you suppress a target, it's got minus 20 foot to speed now. And if it was a critical hit that suppressed them, the target is also stunned 1. Yeah. I mean, it's a buff. I mean, the crit effect is nice, but the extra speed penalty, yeah, as if that was the best part in Starfinder. Because apparently, it's a much more static game. Then we have Brutal Barrage, because we needed more one-action things to do. But if your next action is an area fire auto-fire, plus 2 damage to creatures adjacent to the center point of the impact, or in the first 10 feet of a cone or line. So for area, of course, this is using the cone effect. But yeah, it's annoying that this is one action, but I mean, it is actually good. But this does come into the problem of, oh, yes, yeah, you're only doing this in the area fire. So there's not a lot you can do other than this. So you're just very limited in what you can do. You can't really do it with anything else, but it's kind of like it's meta magic for AoE weapons, but it's... And this one does feel like it'll just dominate your playstyle, where it's like, well, at least you got shot on the run to keep moving, but like if you reload, rip. But not a fan of the one action stuff, but this one at least it kind of justifies it by, yeah, no, this is really good. Arguably too good, actually. Now, sadly, this does not work with concentrated shots, I don't think. Because it does require area fire auto fire, but concentrated shot doesn't use the area effect. So, yeah, unfortunately that doesn't function, but... Oh, well. I mean, you get 2 additional damage dice, so... That's gonna be a lot of fun. Then Close Combat Bully. Currently the only actual fighting style specific feat. Which is kind of weird. Like, granted, there are some feats that do care if you're a certain fighting style. For example, of course, Bring It On does have a synergy with Armor Storm. Collateral Witness had an additional effect for Action Hero and all of that, but it is kind of interesting to see one that's like, oh yeah, it straight up requires you to be that. But start each your turn, when you regain actions, you get an additional reaction just for Punitive Strike. Yeah, it's not bad, especially since you do have a few other reactions. Like, of course, Overwatch, Deflect Missile, all those. Actually, I forgot to talk about Overwatch. That one pretty much, as a reaction, when a suppressed creature in the first ranging of your ranged weapon makes a ranged attack or leaves a square. Basically a reactive strike for range. But you make a ranged strike, treated as a primary strike. And if you critically hit, you disrupt it, and you ignore unwieldy on it. So basically, you just deal damage to them and suppress them. But I think this is supposed to still deal damage, but it is through primary target, so that implies that it's not doing any damage, but oh well. Just suppressing and potentially disrupting the action's fine. But anyway, yeah, it close combat bully functions. Though I think also maybe it should also work on Overwatch, where it's like, oh, if you have Overwatch, you get it for this. But, oh well. Then you have Come Get Some once per day when you reduce to 0 hit points or dying. Basically, you make a melee range strike with a -2 penalty, or make area fire or auto fire with the DC decreased by 2. aka mostly just this, unless you're close combat, and which you'll do the melee strike. But after the strike, you fall unconscious. So basically, one last strike, which is definitely nice to have. Is like, oh yeah, boom, area fire in response to dropping. It's one of those. It's like it's good when it comes up. You don't want it to come up often, but when it does, it's like, yeah, it can feel pretty rewarding and useful still. Then we have Dance, which requires suppressing fire, but you'll have that anyway, pretty much. When you suppress a target, it also becomes off guard. And when auto-firing in a cone that only affects a single foe, they take -1 to the save on the attack. So basically, it's kind of a weird one where it's like if you only have one enemy in the area, then you get like +1 to the DC. It is a bit small, but hey, it's there. Kind of weird that it only affects area, like auto fire, rather than just working on anyone, like any AoE attack, which is weird, but oh well. But like, also the name, it's like, I mean, obviously this is like you're shooting at someone's feet to make them dance, but it definitely is a weird name to see on the soldier, where it's like, dance, which is just odd. My little friend, they're missing the say hello to, but once per round is a free action. Thank goodness that's a free one. Basically, you have a favored weapon, which you choose during daily preparations. And when you suppress a target with an attack from the favored weapon, you can attempt to demoralize them as a free action. Yeah, this is nice. It does finally make demoralizing not suck. It is kind of annoying. It has to be with a favored weapon, and they're immune for 24 hours, but I mean, it's there. Also, this comes really late, but oh well. Then Shell Shower, another fortunate free action, once per round. Basically, after making an area fire auto fire, you make any number of adjacent squares difficult terrain, and if it was already difficult terrain, it becomes greater difficult terrain. It does seem to be implied that this is in the weapons area, but like, it could also be implied as next to you, but oh well. Like, I get the idea. The intention is probably like, oh, it's around the AoE, which is cool, but basically, you can just slow enemies down. It is kind of annoying that's like, oh, well, there's not much movement, but I mean, against a charging horde of zombies, this would probably be pretty good. Assuming they don't have ranged attacks and just do that all the time. 12th level, you pretty much have several effects that are specific to having certain types of weapon, which is pretty cool. You also have 3 others that are kind of like weapon agnostic. Uh, +1 that can actually affect 2 weapon types, but anyway, angled shot is for line weapons. So basically, make an area fire with a line weapon, and you can ricochet the line off of a surface. So you can't double damage people, but you can basically, like, say this is a wall. You could shoot it on the wall and then basically cause it to reflect. Fortunately, it does not require any math or angle stuff. It just works the way you want it to, magically. Don't question it. But this is definitely a nice one for various trick shots. Like, let's say this is like a pillar that your enemy's hiding behind right here. You could line shot and then boom, I'm shooting you from around the pillar. Haha! Which is definitely cool. It's kind of dampened by how short a lot of the lines are, because they're pretty much just like 40-foot lines for the most part. So it's not as cool as it could be if there were some really long ones available, but oh well. Then there's bullet hell for automatic and cone weapons. Basically, you make an area fire or auto fire with the weapon, and then any creature that moves through the area you attacked takes d4 damage of the same type per square traversed, with the basic reflex save made at the end of each move action. And on a failure, they become suppressed. So I guess the idea is that you're still, like, shooting or something. I don't know how it's supposed to work with cone weapons, but don't question it. Also, how this doesn't work without using more ammo, but oh well. Ultimately, don't think about it too much, but the idea is still pretty cool, where it's like, oh yeah, they're still taking damage as they try to move through the area. Then the last of the weapon type specific ones is rocket jump for area burst weapons or a missile launcher. As an aside, with the missile launcher, it actually kind of sucks for you. Like, you're probably the last person who actually wants to use them because they're just not good. Especially because they actually do use splash damage rules. For reference, I'm not really a fan of splash damage and how it functions. Mostly due to my, let me say, lack of interest in having just one damage as the explosion. So yeah, missile launcher, basically just worse than an area burst weapon. Yeah, they're really kind of pathetic. So I definitely say the missile launcher part, ignore that. I'd say it's pretty much useless, but oh well. But you make an area fire and then leap. So use the weapon to add a status bonus to distance equal to double the burst or splash radius of the weapon. And you have to be within the weapon's area of attack, but you don't have to save against the effect of your attack. So basically, you're not affected by it, like, you're not damaged by it, is what I think it's trying to say, but you basically create this burst on top of you, and then you get to leap. Movement made as part of this action does not trigger reactions, though the area fire would trigger them normally. So this is definitely a cool one. It's a nice Team Fortress reference, but other than that, it's a useful one, and kind of, it's a neat one, where it's basically a kind of disengaged type effect, where you just, boom, rocket jump out of the way of a horde attacking you. Then we have Death Blossom. You have to have a full ammo weapon and run hot, but it's 3 actions, and just shoot at everyone in range of your weapon. With a -1 to the save, too. You can't make a designated primary target, but I mean, by this point, you've probably started ignoring that because it's just bad. But basically, you just, everything in range is in danger now. Yeah, it's Actually a cool one, just like a Beyblade of gunfire. Have fun. Then we have Hammer the Nail for shoving shot. Once again, this would be good if it wasn't for how shoving shot actually worked, because what this does is, on a successful save, it shoves 10 feet, but 20 feet if it's a critical success, but if you just fail, you only shove 5 feet. Also, on a critical success, it's knocked prone. Once again, with this, we do run into the issue of shoving shot shoves, then does the AoE. So you will be even more likely to push them out of the AoE. So once again, this is cool in theory. It's just, as written, it doesn't work. Just because you shove, then do the AoE attack, when it really should be do the AoE attack, then shove the guy. Or at least specify that he's still affected by the area. Then Load-Bearing Hero is a reaction. Basically, when you and an adjacent ally make a reflex or fortitude save from the same source. So basically, if you're both affected by a dragon breath, you know the thing. Basically, your save result is 1 degree worse, but their saving throw is a degree higher. Basically, the way this reads off to me, this should be after you've rolled the save, so it's like you know the result. But essentially, like, if you succeed but they fail, you can make it where you fail and they succeed. Or, I mean, best case scenario, you crit succeed and they fail, and then you make them just succeed instead. So you both simply succeed, which is actually less likely to happen, especially because reflex is your worst. But for fortitude, it is more likely to function as that, where it's like, oh yeah, I critically succeed. Okay, I'll just let my ally succeed or not crit fail. But yeah, this is definitely good, especially for fortitude saves. It's just kind of annoying that you're not reflex and fortitude based, because otherwise reflex is not as good, because you're more likely to be failing, which would mean you'd crit fail, which you don't really want to do. But, you know, it's a nice thing to have. It's just, I think a lot of the others are just more interesting. Then we have 14th level Fanning the Hammer, because we need more one-action things. Even though there's so many of them, and just never enough actions to use them. But, basically you make an area fire auto fire, ignoring the unwieldy trait. You don't get a primary target, and creatures damaged are not suppressed. But interestingly, this does lead to a very weird unintentional interaction with well, actually no, it doesn't actually, think on second thought, because it is a basic save for half. So I was about to say this does work weird with Bombard, but it actually doesn't work like that, because you do half damage. But, well, actually there's still a weird thing that happens where if a target is actually immune or has resistance equal to the damage you dealt or higher, you still suppress them, which is kind of hilarious. But yeah, because of the wording, I'm pretty sure it's not intended, but if the enemy doesn't take any of the damage because of resistance and immunities, then you actually still suppress them, assuming you would normally suppress them. So for Bombard, they're actually more likely to suppress them if they don't do damage, which is hilarious. Not intended, but okay. Then you have run cowards, so an enemy who crit fails against an area fire or auto fire you make is fleeing for a round. If you're visible, they flee from you. Otherwise, they flee from the site of impact. So, I don't think it's often you're going to get enemies who can't see you, but I think this would work if it was like, oh, they're behind a pillar, like behind a wall, and you shot a stellar cannon and it hit them. They critically fail. Oh, they got to run away from the burst because they can't see you due to the wall, but very niche that you're not visible, but I can think of scenarios where you wouldn't be anyway, so it's fine. Scattering Fire is a 2-action thing for one of your area fire, auto fire deals. Enemies who fail their saves are shoved 5 feet away, 10 feet on a crit fail. If you're using an area burst, they're instead shoved away from the center point. But your primary target is shoved 5 feet on a hit and 10 feet on a critical hit. Assuming you even care about that. Chances are, no. But a shoved creature loses any benefits it had from taking cover, including your follow-up strike from primary targets. So, yeah, it's something. It is funny, though, that this doesn't require a shoving shot, which is very weird, because it feels like this should be a shoving shot mix-in, but because it's basically better shoving shot, because it also cares about like the damage itself, where it's like, and actually thinking about this, I'm baffled that this even exists and doesn't interact with shoving shot at all, which is just weird. But oh well. Special delivery, another 2-action. Basically, you use your weapon to launch your ally. Pick a willing ally of your size or smaller, move them to an unoccupied space you can see in the first range increment of your weapon. Movement doesn't trigger reaction. Then their movement on their feet and don't take damage from the fall. So that's useful. Just don't question how that functions if you shoot your ally like down a cliff. But, oh well. If your ally ends the movement in melee reach of an enemy, they can make a melee strike against an enemy within their reach as a reaction. And if they hit, it becomes suppressed. So yeah, this is a very interesting and wacky thing. Unfortunately, right now, it's kind of incredibly niche because of the melee thing, but this does have utility at least, so there's other ways to use this to just launch allies up a ledge. It is a baffling thing to have, but oh well, it's fun. Then we have Terror Forming, which is a 2-action thing, basically make an auto fire, area fire, no primary target, but instead each area of the square is in the area is difficult terrain, or it becomes greater difficult terrain if it wasn't already. If it was already difficult terrain. And difficult terrain created by this remains in place and can't be changed without extensive engineering or magic, because it's just that powerful. Now, interestingly, this does end up being kind of weird with Shell Shower, where it's like, but like that one affected adjacent squares. This one affects areas in the burst. So yeah, it's just, once again, it's weird where it's like, so wait, we have 2 feats that do difficult terrain from it. Granted, they do it in different areas where Shell Shower was adjacent to the burst. Terraforming is the burst, but it's just kind of weird. And I feel like maybe these are supposed to be reversed, but then Shell Shower is an upgrade to this. Might make sense. I don't know. It's just weird. And also, it's weird that it's happened twice at 14th level with these, where we have a shoving shot upgrade and then also a shell shower upgrade. Because this one's arguably even better than shell shower because it actually makes it where enemies have a harder time leaving the burst, since they might want to do that because, well, there's a soldier blasting them. They might want to, scatter, but this makes it harder, which is pretty useful. Then there's Vector Reflector. I feel like whoever named this couldn't stop giggling at it and is so proud of their name, even though it's kind of stupid. I mean, it is kind of like, oh, Vector Reflector. That's kind of a wacky name, but now I've read this, I'm like, oh, the guy who named this was so proud of themselves, weren't they? At least it's not a meme name. Like, way too many things here. But it's a reaction when a suppressed enemy damages you with a strike somehow. Because, yeah, that's not going to happen much, but oh well. But you gain resistance equal to half your level against the strike. Or your full level if you're Armor Storm. And if the target is within your reach, you shove the enemy with an athletics check as normal. So, yeah, the shove is a bit... you don't always want to do it, but it's a nice feat, It'll help you keep alive and tank a bit more, but you're not that good at getting enemy attention, unfortunately, so there is that issue, but oh well. Then 16th level, we have Excavating Bombardment. Yeah, so you make an area fire or auto fire attack, and you make any number of contiguous squares in the area a trench that can provide cover for a prone creature. And it becomes difficult terrain, so basically a weird downgrade to terraforming, but with a weird potential upside. But... And then also there's this line of the terrain affected is different. It's like, this one is just baffling. It's like, so wait, you do this destructive fire in an area to make cover for a prone creature. It's... Why is this the way that it is? This is just a weird one of like, because ultimately, like, the biggest weird part of it is that area fire, normally you want to do it on your enemy's area, but this one kind of wants to be used on your allies' area, which means this is kind of a... You want to be a bombard for this one, but oh well. Then we have Light 'em Up for 2 actions. Auto fire, area fire, as usual for these 2 actions. If the primary target is concealed, you don't need to attempt a flat check to target it. If it's hidden, the DC of the flat check is 5. When you suppress a concealed creature with it, the debris around it basically reveals its position, so it kind of negates the concealed penalty. So, niche, but when it comes up, this will be very good. Also, DMs beware the very paranoid players. Then we have Overkill, which just does what it does. A surprisingly rare thing for soldier feats. But when you suppress target of an area attack, and only one creature was in the area, you use the concentrated shot feat. It takes persistent bleed damage equal to a single one of your weapon damage dice. So, usually about a d10 or so. If you critically hit with... Then add a second die to the persistent damage, so... Yeah. This is going to be quite a powerful effect. It is mostly for single target, but... well, it's still very good. Just don't question how your flamethrower makes enemies bleed. which is kind of a flavor fail on their part, because that feels like, well, if it's a flamethrower, it should set them on fire. Then we have soldiers training at here. Basically, choose a class feat that is or grants a reaction. Start your turn, gain an additional reaction that can only use for the selected class feat or an action granted by the selected feat. And you can change this with daily preparation. So basically, choose a reaction you have. You get an extra reaction for that each round. So basically a, like, kind of a close combat bully bonus for everyone, which isn't half bad. It does come later, but it's fine. 18th level, then we got coordinated fire, so it's 3 actions, but you make an area fire, auto fire without primary target. Every ally in 30 feet of you can use a reaction to stride, take cover, or reload. So, yeah, basically you trade your action for letting all your allies use a reaction to do stuff. I feel like this is supposed to be on Envoy, but okay. Kind of weird, but I mean, at least lets, allies stride, which is actually useful if you're not a bombard and have allies in the burst, so. But it is kind of weird that this is, like, all the way at 18th. It's like, so wait. This kind of feels like it should be on Envoy, but also is kind of just out there. Like, I don't know. It's a weird one. Like, it has uses, because it's like, oh yeah, take cover, boys. But, oh well. Then we have Demoratosh's Grip. So you can wield a 2-handed melee weapon and 2-handed gun together. So basically, you get your Rotolaser and your Dashko, and just, yeah. It's kind of weird that this is, like, all the way at 18th. You don't get to use two-handed melee weapons or 2 two-handed guns, but so I do think that maybe this should be a bit earlier, because this is definitely cool, but maybe it's earlier and then it has an upgrade to let you just dual wield 2-handed melees and 2-handed guns rather than a melee and a gun. But as it is, this is definitely a cool one to have at the end. It does kind of trivialize quick swap, though, which is kind of weird, but oh well, it's nice. Because that does eat up your reaction, at least, so it's like, yeah, you just always have your melee weapon ready. Then we have Din of Chaos, so when you suppress a target with one of your attacks, they become deafened for the duration of being suppressed. And if they crit fail, or if it was a crit that suppressed them, they also become confused for a round. Okay, so who the heck thought it was a good idea for your 18th level feat to deafen people? Because I'm pretty sure deafen is still, like, it's not really that good of a condition to have. It's like, it's not like it's blinded, but that's just kind of baffling that it's like, oh yeah, your 18th level feat deafens people. Because, like, I mean, I guess if they have a lot of actions with the auditory trait, then it's like a 5% chance to, or 25% chance to fail, but Yeah, it's just... That's so underwhelming that this is at 18th level. What is this, Envoy? But at least their 20th level feats are like, those are kind of cool. Out of the park. Basically, if you use Scattering Fire, so now you have a Scattering Fire upgrade. But the primary target of your area attack is pushed outside to the furthest edge of the area instead of being shoved. This is ultimately it's kind of a niche one, so it's like you push them even further, but if assuming they weren't already like far enough to be just shoved out. Like, don't get me wrong, like you can shove with a line weapon, you can shove people absurd distances, which is actually hilarious to think about, where it's like, oh yeah, it just casually push you like 40 feet away. Which is definitely good, but I feel like this is only really good on line weapons. Also for action hero with automatic, but otherwise it's like, it's okay, I guess. But it has a much more limited bonus. And then Spread the Love. 2 actions, and you choose 2 primary targets. Why? Oh, it's like, oh, you get 2 primary targets for this, 2 things for this terrible feature. It's like, granted, if you have other stuff that happens for primary targets, fine. This is actually okay. Otherwise, this is just... Why would you ever use this? It is the most... Because ultimately, it's like, by this point, you should have another much more useful area fire... 2-action area fire effect. It's like, you should have something better than this. Like, 2 primary targets sucks. It's just... Why? Anyway, for the 20th level feats, we have Hybrid Technique here, which, it's 2 actions, but you basically get to use 2 special 2-action effects, so anything like Spread the Love, or maybe like, Scattering Fire and the Running Shot one. Basically, you get just 2 of those in one. So it's definitely a good feat. Slightly annoying that it's all the way at 20th, but it does feel like, okay, well, that is a good capstone if you have multiple of them. Then we have Living Typhoon, where, you can just area fire as a single action. You can't make more than 2 area fire or auto fire attacks in the same round. So, it's like, oh, yeah, no, you can't just make 3 area auto fire attacks. You're only limited to 2, but do keep in mind, they do actually ignore multi-attack penalty. But for a 20th level feat, I'd actually say that's kind of fair. Ultimately with the soldier, I feel like it's not bad. I just feel bad that it's lost part of its identity. And, well, not even part of it, most of it. Because so much of what soldier used to be was, in 1E, you were the master of whatever weapon you picked up. However, you also had this ability to specialize in certain types of weapon. So rather than just, like, think of it as, the fighter might go out and say, oh, I'm going to be good with 2-handed weapons, or I'm going to be good with sword and shield. The soldier says, okay, that's cute. I don't care what type of weapon I'm using. I care about, like, what category of weapon it is. So I care if it's an axe, if it's a sword. I care if it shoots projectiles or lasers. That's what I care about. which I think was definitely a cool idea that they had for it with the gear boosts, as that's the main thing that did it. Also, I liked how the fighting styles actually had depth beyond just, oh, here's the feat, here's your feature. This is all you get throughout your career. Technically, there are a few feats that do affect them, but they are few and far between, and very much the opposite of the 1E design where you actually got multiple features and got a well-developed build from it, rather than like, oh, well, now all this stuff is optional, and the majority of it is build agnostic. So, because there's literally just one option that actually cares about having a specific fighting style, or actually requires a specific fighting style. The rest is just, oh, hey, here's something that adds half-level resistance. So, yeah, it should probably function with Armor Storm, who does that as well. So, here you go. It works with Armor Storm. And stuff like that, where it's just, I don't know, I kind of feel like it's been over-specialized, where I kind of liked the idea that a soldier could pick up any weapon and be good with it. Like, except maybe like a finesse weapon or a simple weapon. Like, yeah, they don't really care about those, but I'm kind of sad that it's like, you can't just walk around as a Doomslayer type person and just use all the weapons. Also, it's worth noting that one of the weapons that was previously like, oh yeah, that's a soldier weapon in the artillery laser is no longer a soldier weapon, because for some reason it doesn't have the area trait. So it's actually for operative, even though it doesn't make any sense that it's good for an operative. Doesn't help that it's advanced. But ultimately, my thoughts on how to change the soldier. Number one, change Constitution to Strength or Dex for their key attribute. Now, you might be, oh, well, that does technically remove the, oh yeah, the 6 classes in the core rulebook no longer all use a different stat, but I don't care. We don't need a con class. And soldier just ends up in a kind of nonsensical place where it's like, oh yeah, you use your vitality, your healthiness to shoot your area weapons. But, so, I say they go to Strength or Dex so that it's like, oh, well, the stat you use to attack with your gun or melee weapon is what you use to attack with it through the area trait. Also, if you haven't seen the weapon video that I did, where I kind of gave my first thoughts, or pre-playtest thoughts on the weapons, though also my pointing out of just how stupid the AoE weapons are. In that, I suggested that AoE weapons become tied to weapon proficiency, because that has to happen, period. It can't stay like it is where, oh yeah, these just casually ignore whether they're simple, martial, or advanced, so you just use whatever is the best, and that's it. And then also have them tied to the attack stat for the weapon. Whatever you would normally use to attack with the weapon determines the save DC. So if you normally attack with dexterity, well, it uses dexterity for the attack, for the DC. But if you use strength, then you use strength for the DC. Now you might wonder, well, so the strength would only come up if you have Whirling Swipe. But here's my other suggestion that is definitely a bit more important beyond just soldier, but bring in brutal on the weapons, and then most of the heavy, like all the heavy weapons, gain the brutal trait. So they can use strength for the attack roll instead of dexterity, as kind of an inverse of finesse to basically alleviate the issue of strength kind of being pointless. Where it's like, well, strength does nothing but buff melee attacks, which are very uncommon in the system. When it's like you could just get a finesse weapon and use that to attack rather than if you need a melee weapon, since it also buffs your ranged attacks, and that's the default of the system. So strength is kind of neglected right now, so brutal would help alleviate that and allow you to use strength for various weapons. And that would also allow the soldier to go into strength and, kind of get their big, heavy weapons that they use strength for and just start mowing down enemies. Using their strength to basically heft the gun around and, lift it and make sure it's aimed in the right direction. And also it makes sense that a soldier is more athletic and stuff. So this would ultimately require a few changes. First off, soldier would have to go into caring more about weapon proficiency. Maybe they could even go expert to legendary with area weapons and have that as their thing of, oh yeah, you are, or maybe they care about two-handed ranged weapons, whereas the operative cares about non-area and automatic weapons. Soldier cares about area and automatic weapons still, but they get expert to legendary proficiency, just like the envoy. They just have the opposite guns. And then also the operative might have one-handed melee, while the soldier has two-handed melee. Also, another big suggestion I have, cut it out with these, oh, you use a ranged weapon unless you take this one build. It's like, these builds aren't, like, at least in this case, I kind of get the idea of, oh yeah, you want to specialize in a melee fighting style, but I would appreciate if they made it where, like, at least the soldier and operative actually could use melee weapons without requiring a specific build. Because otherwise it's like, oh, well, that's just a Solarian thing, unless you're one of these 3 very specific builds. Though Solarian kind of has the opposite problem, where their range stuff is bad. But ultimately, I think Soldier needs some attention given to it. But at the end of the day, it's going to be changed more by how area weapons work rather than how what they actually need to change being the biggest factor. Though I will admit, I also would not mind them doing away with these one-action things that just aren't interesting when you've got all this two-action stuff to do. Also, maybe add a trait or a tag for feats like this where you use 2 actions to make an area fire automatic, but with an additional effect. Maybe call them, I don't know, bombardment or like bombardment feats or something. I don't know. Just some trait to kind of denote, hey, this is a feat, like this is an action that does the area or automatic, that's 2 actions, and give them a name. Also, some more passives would be nice, because they don't have as many as you'd think, because they've got like 1, 2, 3. Yeah, that's 4 technically. 5. 6. Yeah, 6. 7. 8. 9. 10, 11, 12, 13 feats that aren't some type of action, which means the vast majority of their feats, which is a lot, aren't like, they are actions and stuff. So it's like they've got a lot of active stuff for a class that just doesn't have many action choices. Like, granted, the alternate area fire ones, those actually do function well enough, because it does give you a lot of tactical choices. But the one action stuff, that can go die in a hole, please. Get rid of these. They're despicable. It's like, I mean, unless area fire becomes one action to do, but then it just follows the multi-attack penalty and often uses the unwieldy trait, then it's fine. Which is actually another thing that should be pointed out, but area fire weapons really don't do as much damage as I think they should. At least for their action economy, where I feel like area fire and auto fire should probably do one more dice of damage, or maybe just add a modifier to the damage if you use them, just because they are like big bursty AoEs, but they're two actions, but you don't get a lot of damage out of them. Or maybe make primary target also do a bit more damage, perhaps. And just rework primary target to actually be worth it, because right now it's just, oh, did they succeed their save? Okay, they have to make a target attack against him, and then, because as it is, this is just a lot of text pretty much wasted, because its effect is just not worth it. It's like, oh yeah, here's something less accurate than the main attack that you pick the target of before the main attack and the results of it. So there's no guarantee it affects the enemy you'd want it to affect. It targets what you want it to target. And it's also very inaccurate compared to your main attack, because it's ultimately going to be at a lower proficiency, in addition to using a worse stat for you. It's just got a lot of stuff just going against it. I'd also like it to go maybe more into the carry a bunch of weapons, rather than fighters specialize in one weapon style, where it's like, oh yeah, you have all the tactical choices with your weapons. And let them just go in a gun swapping thing, kind of like the Doomslayer. Because I think that would be cool. But as it is, it's just, it needs a lot of work. And I'd actually say it's probably on par with Envoy for the most mechanically underdeveloped class. But also I do have to say it kind of suffers, like, just from being, just from Paizo's fear of making Soldier fighter in space, when that wasn't really a big issue with Oney, in my opinion, where it's like, well, there is a bit of that, but this is a sci-fi game. Guns are everywhere. So whereas most fighters use melee weapons and occasionally use ranged, soldiers are the opposite. They mainly use ranged weapons, but then only rarely use melee weapons. But it's an easy option they can get into. And then also, yeah, they do have some similar roots, but wait a second. Soldier cares about having a specific category of gun, so they care about whether they're using a laser gun, or a shock gun, or a bullet gun, or a sword. But the fighter, they mostly care about whether you're dual wielding, using a two-handed weapon, using a ranged weapon, or using a sword and shield. Where it's like, that does pull them very different directions, even if there's some root similarities. How they go about that was different. Where I think, they already had a good balance between yeah, Soldier is fighter in space, but it does its own thing. And also, just because you're fighter in space doesn't mean you play like a fighter. Where I think there was less need to be this fearful of, oh, well, what if it's fighter in space? Where it's like, we could have kept gear boosts, and that would have pushed it away from fighter in space. And just being in space, where it's like a ranged meta and all that stuff, also pushes it away from feeling like fighter. But ultimately, if it launches as is, clunkiest class in the game by far. I mean, and even clunkier than Envoy, because Envoy, at least, yeah, they do suffer some similar action woes, as they, due to the way that directives work, a lot of the time, yeah, it does kind of lock you into two actions where it's like, well, get them, then strike, because why wouldn't you? But at least they have, like, it's just two different actions that they're kind of locked into, but they also have an alternative to the second action where it's like, well, you know, you're always going to get them, but you could theoretically do one of these other things, though, depending on your leadership style, that is going to be a bit questionable as to whether those are better. But my point with it is that there's a lot more variety with it, and also there are some, not many, but some different directives that you can, so you have other options. Whereas Soldier, it's like, well, you just auto fire, area fire, and auto fire. That's it. Like, if you do go into the feats, though, I mean, you can get various different 2-action auto fire things. Like, you could get shot on the run, shoving shot, and all that, at least. But ultimately, it's still, yeah, no, you're locked into 2 actions, and it's for one thing. So, yeah. It does have that issue, but you know, it's what it is. I think it could be a lot better, but I am interested to see where they go with AoE weapons and how that affects Soldier in turn. Though it's pretty clear that it's probably going to be, oh yeah, it follows weapon proficiency now, so that mistake is undone, and see where it goes from there. But without further ado, I hope you've enjoyed this video looking at Starfinder 2E's playtest. And without further ado, I will see y'all next time. Halo Zoo out.